This time, welcome everybody. And Gary, would you open us in prayer tonight?
I will. Our gracious God and Heavenly Father, we come before thy throne of grace this evening, and we thank thee for this beautiful day. We thank you for the summer season. We thank thee for the safety that you've given our employees, our first responders, our sheriff's department. We're thankful that we've not had too many incidents this summer, and we pray, Lord, that may continue. We ask for blessings upon our country, our state, our county, and even this little township. We pray, Lord, that you may give us all that we stand in it. As even here in a small township, we make decisions, and we be given wisdom and discernment to make those decisions that are honorable and pleasing unto you. We pray for our armed forces, O Lord, and all that are represented even in our own township and around the state and around the nation as they fight against those, O Lord, that seek to do us harm and others harm. We pray that you may continue with our military and bless them. Be us now, Lord, in this night, and give us all that we stand in need of. Bless us as we meet. Give us all we stand as we return home, giving us traveling mercies there too. In Jesus' precious name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Gary. If you'd all rise now for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. You may be seated. Let the record reflect that everyone is present, including Mrs. Wieringham. So Deanne, your best behavior, please. We had date night, and she's like, I got to sit her. I'm going to come watch. So, all right.
Wow.
That'd be good. All right. We have a kind of a shorter agenda tonight. Anyone wish to place our agenda before the board for approval?
So moved.
Who support?
Supported. Any comments, questions, changes?
I had a question under 6.3, the investment report for second quarter.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just more of a comment of, I was looking at it, I'm assuming that MM stands for mutual fund?
Money market?
Money market. And I'm looking at return. It doesn't really have an interest rate of what we're getting on that money market. So I'm curious as to whether we're going to be doing better with those investments. It seems like interest rates are much more higher than what we're actually getting on some of our investments. So
very good. I think during general discussion at the end here, we should, it's kind of a timely inquiry you make because we just went over that in finance this past Monday. So
good. That's why I bring it up.
A couple things to be said, and probably in particular by Justin during that. So great. Thanks for pointing that out. Anything else on the agenda? All right. Hearing none. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, the agenda is approved. Item 6, communication letters and reports received for information. Item 7, public comment for action items remaining on the agenda. A couple of thoughts about this. First of all, for those who are here from the public, this is an opportunity for you to address any of the matters you might have seen on tonight's agenda, which we publish online, and we do so a week ahead of time. So if you're ever wondering how do you know before you come, you can find it there. We have it on the screen, but of course it doesn't show everything all at once. So that's your opportunity, and then you'll have another opportunity later in the meeting if you wish to either discuss what was addressed during the meeting or possibly something on a different topic altogether. You'll have that opportunity. And then I would say too, Rebecca Curran came, and we like to have our representatives from the commission come as well as our state representative and our state senator. And when they are gracious enough to come, we like to give them a little bit of leeway in terms of timing. So I would ask that Rebecca, probably be good for you to speak during the first public comment, and if you need more than 3 minutes, then you're permitted to do so. Okay, so with that said, who'd like to begin? All right, seeing none, then Rebecca, why don't you take this opportunity? Welcome.
I just wanted to come and thank you guys for all the hard work that you're putting in at the township level. We are definitely here to support you all in whatever endeavor that we can. We have had a lot of stuff going on at the county commission level. I'm sure that you all have stayed up to date on a lot of that stuff. We're currently going.
I'm not allowed to stay up as late as your meetings go, so I have to be told about it.
Sometimes I don't want to be up that late, but I digress. I'm not a night owl. But anyways, we're going into the budget process. So we're currently working through those. We hope to have several different several different options of budgets for us to approve. So that we have to have that all approved by October. So we're working on that. Our county administrator, our deputy administrator, Patrick Waterman, turned in his notice today. So there will be an opening there if anyone is interested. Everything else is moving forward. We had some grants coming up. 2 of them we put on hold. We were excited to find out that we were looking to do some ADA accommodations with our health department. We were able to get some amendments to that grant, so we will probably be moving forward with that in our next meeting, which will be tomorrow night. Our meetings are the 2nd and 4th Tuesday of every month. The first one is at 9 a.m. and the second one of the month is at 6:30 p.m. So those are all my updates. So thank you guys. Do you guys have any questions for me?
I would just say continue to look out for Georgetown.
Yes.
We don't always know what's going on there at that level, and I think sometimes it's been said before to Kyle that I think we've been run well enough and quietly enough for long enough that we're easy to overlook, and we'd like to obviously have you be our voice and our representative at the table, so to speak. And when there are opportunities that we may not be apprised of, hopefully you are thinking about us and including us. And if there are things that you have upcoming that you would wish more of the public to weigh in on or to know about in advance of a meeting, you can, of course, feel free to forward us whatever you think is a relevant document. And we've got a board email that's sort of a group email through our website, and we would welcome that.
All right, great. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for coming. Okay. Anyone else during the first public comment period? Seeing none, we'll close that period of time, and we'll have the second one later in the meeting. Item 8, consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve tonight's very short consent agenda?
So moved.
Support it.
Okay. Questions, comments, concerns? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
And anyone opposed? Motion carries. Item 9, the blend and payback remittance. A number of years here, and this came out of utilities, of course, so someone wish to place this matter before the board by way of a motion?
So moved.
Support. Moved and supported. Okay. Well, I would ask maybe to kick off the short conversation about it, if there is any. The thing that perplexes me is I think of Blendon as someone that we have helped, right, with some of our infrastructure. I look at the agreements that are attached, and it seems that it was money to be paid to us for the 03 and the 06. So just help me bridge the gap between how we end up paying money to them. I'm sure I'm just missing the logical connection, but
we collect also fees for ourselves on those hookups. So we're collecting our charges as well as theirs, which went into a pot for their payback agreement with the developer. So we collected money for ourselves, and we collected money for them because they didn't have a process for that. So we got the funds that were due us on every hookup.
That was years of accumulation, was it, Rob? Okay.
Yes.
Why didn't we, like, annually disperse what was their share? Was there a reason? I mean, have we held that for as many as 15 or 20 years, or
I just think it expires after 10 years, typical payback agreement. I can't answer why.
Okay.
We had a meeting with the Blendon folks a couple months ago, and I brought it up and said, hey, this is a liability on our books, and it doesn't make sense that it continues to sit on our balance sheet. And they agreed, and again, they've had board turnover as well when these were made, and just sitting in that account.
Okay. And it was in our budget for this year, right? So we knew.
Yeah, it doesn't affect. It's just a liability, a separate balance in a bank account. So it makes no sense for us to hold on to it. And our next discussion will be the process going forward, because there'll be future sewer hookups. We'll still collect a fee for that, but we're not going to continue to fund the payback account. So.
Others, or maybe you all understood it.
Well, we are looking into new agreements with London Township. So we're putting together new water and sewer agreements with them with the new water line that's coming down 48th Avenue and stuff. So this is the past agreement that was kind of overlooked. And we're working on that with the county. Actually, the county is working with us trying to figure out what those new agreements are going to be for future water and sewer hookups.
Okay.
So,
and this, is a bigger can of worms, I suppose, but we're not being looked at indefinitely as their infrastructure and service provider, primary hookup. Are we on 48th for most of Blendon? I mean, are they to be taking more of that responsibility for themselves? Or?
They do not want a DPW.
Yeah.
So we will be charging them for certain things because we will be servicing with our DPW. We'll be paid for that, which we do very well with that, by the way. So, but with a new water line down 48th Avenue, they're actually looking at increasing the water line to, where are they going to go down? Port Sheldon to 56 over to Baldwin and try to get that loop along with our 40, try to piggyback with that 48th Avenue corridor water line that we're putting in. So they're trying to work those numbers. Those numbers came in very high because originally they wanted to go down Berry Street, but that increased the size of the water line from 24 inch to 36 inch. That got to be several millions of dollars. So, which they don't have that kind of money. So they're trying to get it down so that they can start service more of their township. A lot of it's for fire. They're getting apartment projects and stuff in there, that don't have water for fire. So there's kind of a push for that. And development's going that way.
Hopefully smartly and slowly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Nice. What's our payback when you said we profit from it? How much?
I know it's according to the hookups. I know Joe's got that all down. I don't really know what they are. I've talked to Joe Hanberg. It's like we get so much for connection fees. We charge more for the water that comes through our lines. We charge more for sewer that comes through our lines. So there's a payback through different things. Hookups, water and service. We sell them water. We sell them sewage. So it's been good for us. It's been in our favor. I don't know what that is. If that's continued or not, I don't know.
That's why I'd like to see the numbers, because if it's like 10%, so on a hookup it might be $350, but if it maxes out capacity of a lift station, then we end up having to eat the bill on that, which could be $9. So $350 really isn't much.
Right.
And that was the issue I have with that. Those agreements need to be looked at carefully.
Yep.
Because I would love somebody to, take care of all our DPW for us. And we just give them whatever 10%. It's fantastic.
And that's what
I don't want is my constituents to suffer down the road because of poor planning now.
I don't think anybody's suffering.
Not yet.
That's why we have the Baker Tiller report that's in front of us too.
We just upgraded that lift station on Hidden Lakes.
The developer did. For the most of it, yes.
So those are all what is it called? RTUs, or residential units.
Mm-hmm.
There's a certain capacity, so
correct.
We don't want to be doling out, because there is no limit on how many they could go in. We could put in a new lift station and they could use up every single one of them, and we would have no say in it.
It would be possible, yes.
Yes, and that's my concern. So that would be a financial burden on our taxpayers, our water sewer customers, and hamstring us.
Not necessarily, because of the fact that we charge for that sewer going to that lift station.
And that's why I wonder what that percent is. If it's 10%, then it's not much.
I don't know what it is.
And that's fine. Charge is great, but I'd like to know how much, just so we can, and hopefully that's looked at closely.
There will come a point in time where every township has to take the next step and go to the next level. And
well, and we're working on that. That's what we've been. That's what we got
with them, though. Yeah.
That's why we got all the Baker Tiller reports. We're trying to consolidate this all into one. Figure out what it's costing us. Well, what do we have? We've never even had decent flow meters on our lift stations to know exactly how many RTUs are there. We take an estimate, but we really don't know if there's 60 RTUs, there's 60 homes can go to that lift station, or 160, because we just go by what's assumed for that size pump and that size pipe. But now with the new flow meters we're putting in these things, we can determine exactly how many homes can hook to that lift pump. We've always conservatively said, 60, but it might be 160. We don't know until we get these meters in. That's why we're trying to upgrade our system, get it figured out so our infrastructure is good. And I think we're on the right path with the Baker-Tiller report that we're working on right now, and we're doing a lot of cammering of our sewer lines, and we're fixing a lot of things. I think our DPW guys, Joe Hannenberg's doing a great job.
Prime and Newhoff was doing the estimating on RTUs.
On what?
RTUs, the capacity.
Yeah, I mean those
So it was all done outside of the township.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
I want to give credit where credit's due.
Any other comments related to the motion? Okay, hearing none. All in favor say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Item 10, what Gary just alluded to, the rate study presentation here with Baker-Tiller. Appreciate the representative coming tonight. Please introduce yourself and may address the board. Yeah.
Intent here is to present and inform and discuss, and then we would bring this to utilities to discuss further and then provide a recommendation to the full board. So.
Understood. All right, so it's not a decision-making night as much as an informative.
Correct.
Answer. All right.
Correct.
Okay. Yes, sir.
How's everybody doing? Andy Campbell with Baker-Tilly. Just as some background, we do financial advising across the state of Michigan. In our two lines of work are in bond issuance and user rate studies. We work with about 400 communities in the state. In your area, we work with like Plainfield Township, Alpine, Coopersville, Sparta, Kent City, Wayland, lots of communities, Rockford. So we've seen it all in terms of like different communities, like the biggest communities work with some of the biggest systems in the state and some of the smallest. We're here to kind of give you our preliminary view of, obviously it's a little bit more than just the first draft. We've worked very diligently with Joel and with Rob, and previously Rod, now Justin kind of finishing it up in terms of what this looks like in terms of the first draft going to the board of where we see rates going. As a little preface, we obviously, again, working with all these communities we work with, the township from our standpoint and what you'll kind of see going forward is you're in a very positive position. So this is not a negative, like we've got to look at raising rates because we're running the system into the ground. It's more of a, this is what you've got to look out for. We have a lot of capital improvements coming up, as Gary talked about. There's the water main is one of the biggest ones that we're going to be doing in the next couple of years. There's a lot of capital improvements coming up. We're going to try to avoid debt as much as possible. So I know that in talking with the working group, that was one of the goals, was to try to present an analysis that avoided debt in the foreseeable future. We're going to talk about how we can accomplish that, how we're going to potentially, in the future, if you have to issue debt, how that looks and what we may do around that. And then kind of talk through the life cycle of a system, because just in terms of where you guys are at right now, we want to kind of give you our opinion on where we see townships fitting in the Michigan picture of utilities right now, and just going to give you kind of some feedback on what you need to look at going forward, knowing the life cycle of an asset. So getting into the numbers here, there's a lot of highlights. If you had a chance to review it, I'm going to kind of go through all like the various numbers of how we build our analysis. This is just the background information. We'll submit our pretty report with all the graphs and everything when we're done, and kind of get a nod that this is a viable solution going forward. As Rob talked about, we are happy if we need to change it, if you guys say, hey, let's do this or that, or move this project around, and that comes from the board or utilities committee, we're happy to do different scenarios if that helps. So, with no further ado, I'll talk through the building blocks of the analysis here. So on page 1, this is directly from your audits. So it's the 19 through 22 audits, and the first major input that we have is the cash and pooled investments. One of the things to note when we build rate studies is we do everything separate when you start talking about water and sewer. So you will see how in the first couple pages, your audit is a combined fund. Your fund is combined between water and sewer. You'll see how that gets broken out between water and sewer here in a second. We do think it's important that you take a snapshot to see how both funds are operating effectively separately to make sure that you are doing the right thing by making sure you're charging the right water rates and the right sewer rates to cash flow everything correctly separately, knowing that it ultimately, on the last page, you'll see it all flows into the combined fund and operating it as one fund. This right now is combined, so as of 2022, you'll see in the top right-hand number, you had just shy of $16 million in the combined fund. Very healthy balance. I will talk about, like, you've been able to operate the systems very effectively. You've saved a reasonable, but not too much in terms of cash and investments balance to start addressing the capital improvements going forward. A lot of this is making sure that we keep the momentum, and how are we going to keep the momentum for the next 5 to 10 years to successfully operate the fund. So good on the cash and investment side. That's going to really help with this water main project that's coming up in the next couple of years. That will help alleviate a lot of the stress. But you can see that it has built up in the last couple of years is in anticipation of capital improvements primarily. On the next page, again, this is directly from your audits. One of the things that we kind of talked about is that you've had some growth. You're a growing township, but you will see, like, if you look at the water sales and the sewage ones, the water's in yellow, sewage is in orange. You've been kind of stagnant in the past couple of years. So this is something that is just a kind of an FYI as you look at this of when we start forecasting out in the future 5 to 10 years, one of the things that we have to be aware of is that the connections are not going to save us forever. We're not going to continue to grow and grow and grow and everything's going to be fantastic. What's actually happening right now is that you're kind of growing and ultimately you're kind of seeing a little bit of conservation from the users that's kind of counteracting your growth, and your revenues are kind of stagnating. So when we talk about this and going forward, growth is going to be something we're going to talk about how we address that, but we do have to be very careful in the sense of it's not going to be the solution for our capital improvement plan, that we just get more customers and everything is paid for. You can see that ultimately the customers that are currently on the system are using a little bit less to counteract that. That's very typical in Michigan. It's pretty typical countrywide for the most part. Conservation is a big thing that people hear about in terms of water and sewer. There's different arguments, not going to get into the politics side of that, but ultimately you are seeing some conservation on the system just like a lot of systems around the state. You just have a little bit of a different and more positive outlook than a lot of communities with their growth. Page 3. This now gets into how do we separate funds to show water and sewer separately. So if you could look at your papers here, it's going to be a little bit easier to read for this page. There's a lot of numbers flying around. So page 3 is the budgets for the past few years, and then ultimately on the right-hand side, how we split that into water and sewer. This was done with a lot of help from Joel and Rob in terms of how do we best allocate the cost, knowing that it is a combined fund and the funds are going to go into a combined fund. But we want to make sure that we are charging the water rates effectively and the sewer rates effectively and not getting lopsided one way or the other. So we do split it out between water and sewer. You can see how each of the various line items are split. The ones that are highlighted are the ones I want to concentrate on. On the water side, on the salaries and wages side for the water and sewer, in the yellow there, you'll see that we do anticipate an increase in what we call the test year. The test year is a rate-making term about a normalized year. So it's not necessarily your budget. Your budget may or may not be a normal year per line item. But when we look in the future and we say 5 years from now, 10 years from now, we need to make sure that we're accounting for X amount to start with. And that may be that we had a one-time expense in the budget that's going to be one time and that's not normal, so we need to kick that out. Or we may be short-staffed and we really need to start hiring people to fill our vacancies, so our budget is too low. There's different things that we do to normalize the budget. One thing that we talked about as a goal for the township system, I think in terms of one of the goals that Joel had especially, was we need more people to help operate the systems effectively. This accounts for bringing in 2 people in the next year to help operate the systems better. This is one of the key talking points of the life cycle of a system that you're starting to get into, and there's going to be a recurring theme here that you'll start to see. Township systems, you're in the very same view of a lot of growing townships that we work with, especially the ones that are like on the outskirts of Detroit, outskirts of Grand Rapids. They're in this what is a very good time of the funds are seeming to operate themselves. You're able to keep rates really low. You have some connections every year. Taxes are pretty low. Everything seems to be pretty good. And then you start to get into a position where you really have to be careful, because ultimately what you need to do is take heed from what's happening to the cities and villages of Michigan, and make sure you're looking across the street to like Hudsonville, Kentwood, Wyoming, Granville, your suppliers especially too, and see how their life cycle is affecting them, and that I'm not going to speak for each of them separately, but a lot of the cities and villages are starting to figure out that there comes a point where it gets to be very, very expensive to stay in the water and sewer business, and you start to want to plan for that, what you're doing now, instead of waiting until it's too late. There's a lot of cities and villages that are going through massive heartache. We have communities that are charging way more in terms of rates than what you guys are charging, and then we'll get to how that is and why that is. But ultimately, there's what's called the SAW grant. If you want to do more research on this, I won't bore you too much tonight, but the SAW grant was done about 5 years ago, which helped communities that are in a more late term of their asset management in terms of trying to figure out what's going on with their system. Cities and villages, use this in the state. And what ultimately came out of the SAW grant was that a lot of the systems in Michigan are not good, and they're having to do major rate increases. I mean, our highest rate increase that we've had to do is 150%. Not a good discussion. We actually just had a discussion a couple weeks ago about a potential 300% rate increase. There's a lot of communities that are figuring out that it's not always the best thing to keep rates at rock bottom forever and not maintain your system. So one of the things, the way that we kind of address this with Joel and Rob especially is, from my standpoint, from a rate consultant standpoint, the most effective ways to do that are cash funding your system and maintaining your system better. So how can we do that? The first thing that we addressed was staffing it in a better way. So if you have more people, you can do better maintenance, you can keep assets better maintained, you can extend the life of the asset without having to rip everything up and replace it all. So that was a key point that we talked about in terms of maintaining the system effectively for the next 5, 10, 20 years, was having enough staff to, as the assets age and you need more maintenance and need more upkeep, that we have the people to do that. The next one down, if you have any questions, please stop me at any time. You don't need to wait. The next one down is in orange. It correlates to the one in blue right below that. These are your purchases from your suppliers. So water comes from Wyoming, sewer comes from Granville. What is key about those is that you'll know that we have, if you read the report, we have assumptions on what they're going to do with their rates to you. So this is based on the fact that Wyoming is telling us 4% a year is their estimate right now in terms of rate increases. Granville saying 5% a year. Those are built into the analysis with those assumptions. So if they stay within that rate track, we're good on our rate track. One of the things we have to be very careful about when you're on a supplier system, again, what I talked about with asset management, if for some reason their system completely fails tomorrow and they need to raise your rates 50%, you got to figure out, you got to update the analysis to figure out what that means to you overnight. So we did everything that we could in terms of getting as much information from your suppliers, obviously through Rob and Joel's and their help, to make sure that we have a valid assumption going forward. But this ultimately assumes what they're telling us in terms of the rate track, and putting that forward in a yearly inflation factor. It's not really highlighted that well, but in the gray there, this is just something ancillary. Again, we talked about this is another point of the recurring theme. You're going to have more and more maintenance on the system as it ages. You're going to have more and more responsibilities for keeping up with trucks, vehicles, anything that comes up. So that was just, I wanted to make sure to highlight that we are trying to build in a better plan going forward in terms of how do we staff the funds correctly, how do we maintain the funds correctly, because ultimately the more and more you can extend the life of the assets, you're going to save your ratepayers money. So trying to do that in a responsible way and build out the rates in kind. Ultimately, you can see at the very bottom, like the turquoise at the very bottom is your total budget is split between water and sewer. You can see that water on a normal year is going to be $4.2 million, and then sewer is going to be $5.5 million, and that is the first building blocks that we bring into, like, how much do we need to bring in to operate the system. Water, we have to bring in at least $4.2 million. Sewer, we have to bring in at least $5.5, and that is just to cover the baseline operations and maintenance on the systems. Page 4. Before we split out the cash flow, ultimately the cash flow is obviously the most important with how we build out where rates are going to go. I wanted to give you guys just a purview of like what happens in 2023 with the rest of 2023, where we're currently standing, and give you some thoughts there. So in yellow are your current rates. This is your current fund as it stands, and this is combined, because again, this is a combined fund. So combined, you have your current rates for water, ready to serve rate of $10 per quarter, consumption charge $2.30 per 1,000 gallons. Sewer is $10 ready to serve rate, $3.70 per 1,000 gallons. Generally speaking, just as a little tidbit, I mean, it is generally more expensive to operate sewer in the state of Michigan. So you have a very typical system. It's a little bit more expensive to maintain sewer. Typically, the pipes are a little bit bigger. The assets are a little bit bigger in terms of the plant. You have a little bit more responsibility there. And you're trying to get rid of a lot of different contaminants and chemicals and such and bad stuff before it gets back into the system. So when you talk about the typical homeowner's bill, this to us is extremely important when we start looking at being brought in to analyze the system. Where is the current typical homeowner's bill versus how are you running the cash and investments? Again, what I talked about before, you have to be very careful. There's a lot of communities, if you compare yourself to other communities out there, there's a lot of communities that charge really low rates, but they're also running their system into the ground. You have to have both. You have to be able to charge reasonable rates and operate your system effectively, which you're not going to know unless you do a little bit of digging, whether they're doing that or not. But the reality is that Georgetown, you guys have been doing that. Your system has been operating effectively. You're doing capital improvements. You're maintaining the system. You do have very, very low rates. Again, this is like the sweet spot that townships get in when they first build systems, is that everything is really, really good for a period of time. So going through the typical homeowner's bill, if you look on your sheets, you can kind of see it a little bit better in blue there. The typical homeowner's bill, this is the metric that's used by the state. It's used by the township on your rate sheet to see what a typical homeowner pays. So it depends on if you're a typical homeowner or not, if you use more or less of water and or sewer. This assumes that you use 15,000 gallons per quarter. One of the things is that this does not include irrigation, so this is just your domestic bill. So if you use, well, I guess it includes 15,000 no matter what you use it for. But the typical homeowner in Michigan is thought to use 5,000 gallons per month around there, or 15,000 gallons per quarter for just the domestic in-home use. If you look at that and how it correlates to what you're currently charging that typical homeowner, their water rate is $44.50 per quarter. The sewer bill is $65.50 per quarter. The total bill is $110 per quarter. To give you some color on that, we have systems that are charging more than $100 per month per system. Your bill is $110 per quarter combined. I honestly don't know of too many. There's a couple that are, the Kalamazoo system used to be very cheap. They've had to raise their rates significantly in the past couple of years. Grand Rapids, I think, has another couple communities that are pretty low rates, but you're in a very unique position where you're still running the systems very effectively and being able to charge very low rates. Ultimately, your combined charge is like, what's that, $37 a month combined? That's extremely, extremely low. When you start talking about maintaining the system, this is a very good place to start. It depends on how we're going to talk about what the potential rates, our recommendation at least of where rates go in the next couple of years. It's not going to make people feel great, but it is going to help, I think, with the education to say, like, we are extremely, extremely low right now, and we're trying to get to where we can fund the systems better. It's better than the opposite of being way high and having to go way high, way high. So that's something to keep in mind when you start talking about people and how this affects them, is that your rates are very, very low right now. If you go down further, just kind of a tidbit at the very bottom, we do anticipate the cash to continue to rise at the end of this year. The ARPA grant, I'm going to get to that here in a second because I want to kind of set the stage on why we're potentially going to use ARPA here for some capital improvements. But going forward, we're going to start talking about these separately for a second here. So the next page, on page 5, brings in the final building block for the analysis of the capital improvements. So this is going to start with water. So the water capital improvements are on here. When we start talking about the capital improvement plan, you start to see how it's been important that you've built up this cash for years, but ultimately we are going to access some of that to do some of the improvements coming up. It really comes down to if it's keeping the rate increases lower that you've had the cash built up. So the positive of this is that even with the rates that we're recommending, with the cash balance that you currently have, we're able to hopefully fund the project that Gary is talking about, which is the big transmission main project. As long as bids stay within reason, we do have that as estimated to be paid strictly with cash. So using the funds, the current water and sewer funds for that. I will caution, and this is what we kind of told Rob and Joel that we have to be very careful about, is like bids are completely out of control right now on construction projects. We trust the estimates and we think that they are good estimates, but we ultimately have to understand that we have to make sure we get to bids before we can really 100% say it's going to be paid with cash. That project, in terms of a very, what we believe is a conservative estimate, is about $15.7 million for the 3 phases of, you can see that it's like number 1, 48th Avenue, Berry to Port Sheldon, then Port Sheldon to Baldwin, which is the number 4, and then 5, which is Baldwin Street. We're hopefully very conservative. We understand what's happening with the construction market, but those are big assumptions when you start talking about that amount of money and trying to do that in the next couple of years. So the hope is that we access the reserves, the construction bids stay within estimate, and we can pay for that with cash. You can see over the next few years, there's other capital improvement projects in there. That's not the only project that we're targeting on water. There's a few things here and there with meter replacements, a couple other projects here and there. Overall, over the next 5 years, I understand like the transmission main is the main project on water. Going out further, we did talk about, there's a couple other things that are on tap. There's a big one out there in 2031. That's improvements in storage.
What is that?
So a lot of that's going to come down to growth of the township. So when we talked about improvements in storage with Joel, and I'd have to lean on Rob a little bit. I mean, a lot of this has to do with the fact that as you grow, you're going to need more, I believe it's above ground storage to have
36th Avenue.
Fire flows and just access if you run into problems like water pressure, fire flows. You have to have certain storage on hand depending on how many customers you have if your system needs to be shut off for any reason. So that one was talked about a lot because ultimately we did not, when you talk about like, that's estimated to be like 16 million with inflation. What we kind of talked about in the working group was we don't want today's rates to be affected by that project.
Right.
So we want to plan for it and say, okay, it's realistic that we might have this come up in the next 5 years. It could be 10 years. It could be 15 years. Depends on where the growth of the township goes. So we don't want to artificially raise rates on today's customers and then not need to do that and then just be stockpiling way too much cash on today's customers' backs. So what we did in terms of that was it's out enough to where the rates of today are not affected. We're going to put in inflationary rate increases, hopefully. Again, we'll talk about this in a second. But it more comes down to we do believe that the growth and or debt or something could potentially help with that in the future. And we're not going to try to save $16 million right now for that. So that one was one I wanted to kind of key in on to make sure that everybody knew that there's the potential out there for that big growth and storage project, the improvements in storage. And we don't want to start saving millions upon millions of dollars on today's ratepayers when that could be paid with growth or debt in the future. So,
did you cover the sewer line on 48th Avenue from Bauer to Port Sheldon?
Yes, that's in the sewer side. Yep, you'll see that in a second. So, yep, this is just the water side right now. So,
which is basically going to have to interlock with the storage facility that you're talking about on 36th Avenue, because without sewer to the northwest quadrant of the township, the water won't be needed up there because there's going to be no growth unless you have the sewer first. So it's all got to dovetail together. That's why I asked if you had that. So
make sure that when we look at the capital improvements that we talk about that.
Yep.
So on the water side, just like when we build out rates, we obviously look at this in a long-term view. We want to make sure that we're ultimately going to look at like a 5-year plan. But actually, I think it goes out a little bit. Now it's 5 years, 6 years technically. So we look at a 6-year plan right now, but we do look at this longer than that in terms of the analysis, especially with the working group, to say we can't look at this in just a finite 6-year picture and forget about what's coming up after that. So we did take a look at that. We talked about it in the working group and how we're going to potentially address that, knowing that, again, we don't want to affect rates too much right now on the if come that that's needed and how much it's going to be needed 10 years from now, potentially. So let's go to the next page, page 6. So this is, again, water only. So this brings into the first rate structure analysis of what our recommendation is for the water side of the system. Again, just as a recap here, on the water, our current rates are $10 ready to serve per quarter and $2.30 per 1,000 gallons. The typical homeowner pays $44.50 per quarter. Ultimately, when we talked about this with the working group, one of the major things that we talked about is that as a rate consultant, I really like the plan of building everything out and trying to pay for everything with cash and avoiding debt as much as possible. But in order to do that, something has to give on the other side, and that really comes down to, are we willing to adjust rates to do that? So this kind of shows that it's a valid plan. It gives you a good stepping stone in terms of the future of how to address that and meet that goal. And here is one scenario to do that in terms of how do we avoid debt in the next couple of years. We pay for the capital improvements that we need to pay for, and also make sure that we're setting up the system for the future success as well. So I'm going to go through what our scenario is in terms of the working group and how we came to our recommendation. So in the 2024 column, you'll see a number in yellow, the ready-to-serve rate. So we recommend raising that to $13.50 per quarter. The consumption charge, commodity charge, would be $3.11 per 1,000 gallons. If you look in blue, the typical homeowner's bill would be $60.15. So if you do the math, we're looking on the water side, we're looking on the tip. Again, I always have to stress this, like customers are different, but we ultimately want to see how this affects your typical homeowner so we can kind of relate it back to what this is going to do to the pocketbooks of everybody. The typical homeowner would go up approximately $5 per month. So in 2024, their water bill, just the water portion of the bill would go up about $5 per month. And then that would stay the same. It's not like every single month that would happen. You'd set rates for 24 on that rate. So that's the recommendation for 2024. The ARPA grant, which I kind of talked about a little bit, I do want to concentrate on that right now. We talked about this a lot, and you're using, if you look at the 2023, you're using some of the ARPA grant funds for current projects this year. There's going to be a lot of competing discussions about this, and I understand maybe this goes back to the board or utilities committee or something, but we were heavily talking about this in the working group that when we talked about where rates are going to go on the water side, there's a lot of capital improvements needed in the next 5-10 years, especially the transmission mains. We strongly recommend that you consider using what is ultimately another $1.6 million of ARPA grants to help fund the capital improvements on the water system. So you'll see that in pink there is to help make this work, and ultimately what that does is it helps keeps the rate lower. So we obviously, if without that, we started at a higher recommendation. Bringing in the ARPA grant, we were able to lower the recommendation. What turned out to be, like, again, $5 per month for the typical homeowner. That was talked about a lot in terms of how that could potentially work, but it really is hopefully to keep the transmission main and keep all the capital improvements going forward without as much of a rate impact on the water system.
So are we getting more ARPA money? 1.6? I guess
No.
I'm confused at that point. So we got 1.4 that we've spent already or allocated.
Correct.
So the 1.6 is in addition to that?
There's remaining funds that have yet to be allocated, is my understanding, and we are recommending that we use 1.6 to be allocated towards water.
What did we going to fire allocated, but again, that hasn't come, and then we had one
for roads as well.
Yeah, we were talking roads next year, so this would be instead of roads, ARPA.
Okay.
So
Do we allocate the roads 2.5 for roads?
I don't know what your question was.
How much did we allocate to roads? 2.5?
Is whatever the remainder of the truck and the initial 1.4. What was that? I think we allotted whatever the remainder was to
1.6, aren't we?
Was it 1.6?
Yeah. 1.6 is, it could go to roads, it could go to this. We've loosely defined that.
So ultimately, I think what it comes down to is, like, we recommended to the working group that the remaining 1.6 be allocated to water, knowing that the rates are going where they're already going with that, and to try to keep the rates lower for the next few years. That was our recommendation to Rob and Joel, was to allocate those funds to the water system to help pay for the transmission main project. Yes.
Show where rates need to go.
If you take it out?
Yeah.
That'd be no problem. Yeah.
So it's just 1.4, so we're basically adding a 200,000 to it to get it to 1.6 or 1.4 plus?
Plus the 1.6.
Okay.
Yep.
Gotta keep my eye on the card.
So going to the bottom here, just so you can see how it's built out. So the turquoise teal box there, the capital improvements, that's from the previous page. So you can see that's being brought in, the capital improvements in kind are brought in every single year as they're projected out. The other thing on there that we have to be mindful of is the lead and copper rule compliance. That is what we talked about with Joel and the working group, is that the hope is that there are no issues with that, but
there will be no issues with that. I'll bet you $100 that there will be no issues with that.
I will not take that bet in an open meeting, but I will believe you.
Okay. Telling you.
Good answer.
So, yeah.
Done and looking great.
That's extortion.
With the age of the township, it was 100% expected that there would be no issues because when you guys put in the lines and such, realistically it would be very uncommon for you to have the components in the system that the state has told you have to get rid of. But as with every single other community in the state, you have to prove it. You have to show it, you have to prove it, you have to document it. So we did put in a very conservative assumption to make sure that compliance is completed. So you'll see it in there that ultimately we have to complete the compliance and make sure that the state is checked off, that Georgetown does not have to do any more replacements or anything of lead or galvanized steel components in the system. So we have that in there as well. I did want to kind of pause and just give you a sidebar here related to that and other components as well. One of the things that you might see in what's going on with the state of Michigan, and this is nationally as well, is that the common conception is that there's a lot of grant money going around. So a very realistic response to this from either a board or a ratepayer could be, why are we doing rate increases when we could go after a bunch of grant money? I see other communities getting grant money. Why don't you do that instead? The problem is that when you look at how that grant money is being targeted, it is being targeted to communities that have a median household income below the state of Michigan's average, which the township does not. So the state of Michigan average median household income is $63,000 and change. Ultimately, you might hear the term the state revolving fund, which is the big pool that everybody's going into for water and sewer projects to try to get grant money. The major grant money, which is more than, call it like 10% of the project, is going to communities that are in that situation. So they have low median household incomes, they have massive compliance problems, they have a lot of poverty. That's what the grant funds are targeted for. We have a lot of clients that are in the situation of Georgetown. It's not an easy discussion a lot of times, but we have to be realistic when we're talking about the fact that you look at the transmission main project, the township is most likely going to be on its own to fund that. It's not realistic to get grant money or anything because of the demographics and statistics related to the township. So the same with lead and copper rule. I bring it up right now because they're not going to fund like your compliance, or if you had to do replacements, you're going to be on your own for that. That's the reality of where the federal money is going to right now, is to the lower income community. So we see that, and I just want to make sure to address it because it is a valid point to try to make sure that we're going down every avenue before we raise rates, that we look for grants and we look for possibilities there. So we did look at that. We did talk about that in the working group, and with, again, the township's most likely on its own for that stuff.
Do you guys work with writing grants at all too, or not?
Sorry, with who?
Does Baker Tilly work with townships to write grants too, or not?
Some of them, I will say, like Baker Tilly is a big company. We were actually part of a smaller company that got bought out a couple of years ago. There are grant writers, but it's generally for like really, really big grants. Your engineer.
We'll take a really big grant. We don't care.
Yeah. If it's $100,000, that's great too. Typically in Michigan, the best place to start is actually your engineer. So most of the engineers, Prine Newhoff does have grant writers or somebody on staff that helps with those grants, because they're the ones typically that are going to be the front runner for that. Yeah. Continuing on with water here, sorry. The increases per year. So one of the best things you can do on the system, and whenever I talk about rates, I'm going to talk about it tomorrow at the city managers conference. One of the things I always tell communities is inflationary rate increases are absolutely key to making sure that your system runs effectively. Even if it looks like you don't really need to do rate increases next year, it is extremely important because you can kind of get into the position where you see it right now is like we're looking at what we need to do for rates in 2024. If you went back in time like 5 years ago, maybe you would have made a different decision and maybe done 3% a year or something instead of having to do what we're talking about of raising it all at once. It is a strong recommendation that you do the 4% per year on water. How we tied that is we tied it to your supplier's recommendation of their 4%. Now, when you look at the numbers, obviously you can see that there's a difference. They are not your whole budget. So when Wyoming raises their rate by 4%, that affects the one line item in your budget by 4%, but not necessarily every single expense going up 4%. However, with all of the other expectations on the funds of your expenses going up, capital improvements, new staff to help maintain the system effectively, 4% was a realistic target to say that that made sense financially going forward, that you would pass that 4% directly on to your ratepayers to maintain the system in an effective way. So we did put that in there, and you can see that how that affects the quarterly bill. For instance, the 24 to 25 differential, round up and say it's about $2.50 per quarter. So less than $1 per month to the typical homeowner for an inflationary rate increase. So it's a two-prong recommendation in terms of we do recommend strongly that you do the rate increase for 2024 as stated, and then inflation would kick in from 2025 on to help maintain the fund effectively. That's really it on water. Let's get to sewer. Kind of talk through the same thing. So on the sewer on page 7. Same type of discussion comes into play with how we set the rates. Capital improvements that come into play, we need to make sure that we're paying for those. The same discussion was had of obviously if we want to avoid debt on water, we want to avoid debt on sewer if at all possible. So looking at cash funding everything effectively in terms of the next, ultimately this is 10 years. The sewer, you can see, has a lot less capital improvements estimated on it, just in terms of the dollar amount is a lot lower. Realistically, this isn't going to be a huge burden really on your system to hopefully do cash funding as long as obviously it stay within check. So going to page 8, talking about the cash flow. So on the sewer side, we did recommend same type of setup. So the one-time rate increase for 2024 and inflation in 2025, which we'll talk about here. So the recommendation for 2024 is the ready-to-serve rate goes to $13.50 and the consumption charge goes to $5. Your typical homeowner's bill would be $88.50 on sewer, which is approximately $8 per month increase on sewer. One of the differences that you have on water versus sewer has a lot less capital improvements coming up, but they are not as well off financially in terms of the cash flow. So the cash flow on water is very good. If you look at the numbers in the last couple pages, the cash flow is very healthy in terms of the water. The sewer is healthy, but just not as much. So when you're starting to bring in the capital improvements, it's a lot less in terms of the dollar amount, but they don't have quite the same situation the sewer doesn't to handle those capital improvements. So the recommendation dollar-wise is actually a little bit more on the sewer side to get that cash flow in a better position to handle the capital improvements. So the increases per year, again, because it fits financially, we don't just do it if it doesn't make sense, but because it fits financially both from the supplier, Granville, and making sure that the system is operated effectively on your side, we are recommending inflationary increases per year of 5% to the sewer. 5% starting in 2025, and you'll see that's approximately $1.50 per month, $4.50 per quarter. Overall, I'm not going to concentrate too much, but obviously when on the very last page, this all, as I talked about, rolls up into one fund. So we operate everything separately in terms of accounting for water separately, accounting for sewer separately. It all rolls into one fund. You can see how that affects the total, as I talked about, the totals together in terms of the total typical homeowner's bill, how the cash balance is affected as we fund capital improvements and use some of the reserves over the next couple of years, and then ultimately build them back for a reasonable cash balance going forward and saving for future capital improvements and not just spending down everything. And you can see how that all comes into one big picture. Questions, comments?
How much was the 1,000 gallons of sewage? What's the rate going from? It was 370, or it's currently 370. It's going to.
So for sewer, it was 370. It would go to 5.
To 5.
Actually, if you could go, Justin, real quick to page 9. I just want to. So that this is again some color on the quarterly bill. Your combined quarterly bill for 2024, if you followed the recommendations, your typical homeowner would just be just shy of $150 per quarter combined. The state metric that we typically see is we do everything on monthly, so it's typically about $85 a month, so that'd be $255. So the state generally sees $255 per quarter as like the average bill that they, in terms of water sewer combined. You would be going to $148 and change. So with the rate increases that were proposed, you're still well below state average, which I understand it's going to mean different things to different people. I do not pretend that this is not going to affect people. But I do want to make sure you have that educational piece of like we're not going way above the state's metrics and becoming unaffordable. This is still a very low cost system.
Well, very detailed, excellent presentation.
Thank you.
Foresee us having to take any money out of the general fund?
I hope not. Especially with your guys' situation, I do not see that as a smart move. The funds, utility funds, are supposed to be self-supporting. You have the ability to self-support with the way that you're running the funds in the future. It should not be necessary. I would be very surprised if that was needed, or I would say you really should think twice about that. So,
how long have you been doing this?
I've been doing it for a little over a decade.
But it shows.
Yeah, you're very, very.
Andy, it's spreading the pain out, is really what you're doing. Is you're spreading pain over the years, rather than having a painful moment, by running, like you say, running cheap for years, and then suddenly needing to increase by 100% or more, as some communities have done. I don't think we'll ever be eligible for the grants you described, which,
Probably not.
Yeah, that's, I don't know. Sometimes the worse you run your city or township, the more money you track. But anyway, that seems backward. But nevertheless, we won't, that's what it is. Yeah. We won't get that money even if we're not running ourselves well. We've got to spread the pain out. This is precisely, I know when you guys talked about ordering this rate study, and I know we had to approve it and so on, this is precisely what government ought to be doing. This is something you can't do as an individual. And there's plenty of things we see where government largesse is, crept into the personal lives of people and so on. This is something that government can and must do. Good planning, looking ahead, being prepared, getting at it early while you're still saying why you're in an enviable position. Great. Let's remain as such and kind of spread that pain over a period of years, as opposed to leaving that at the doorstep of a future board or what have you. So, utilities. I'm sure you'll dig into it deeper, but this is really, really helpful. Thank you.
If you look at
roughly just 35% increase, water and sewer, basically is what we're looking at.
Correct.
35% increase.
Right.
Does this factor in, there's discussion of a possible $2 to $4, maybe $5 million DPW building? Was that factored into this?
Yes, it was. So, I'm sorry if I glazed over that, didn't I? So let's go to, you're gonna have to put page 7 and page 5 and 7. It's the second line item. So it says maintenance building water portion, maintenance building sewer portion, depending on which page you're on. The current estimated amount that water sewer is going to look at is $3.7 million. So the water and sewer portion of responsibility is $3.7 million is the estimate that we got right now.
3.7 for the building.
That's for water and sewer. There is, remind me here, because
you broke it
there's
off.
not any responsibility for general fund, or there is. It's all water sewer. Okay. So that's the estimate in total for the building, 3.7.
Now, our infrastructure, I guess, is roughly 1/3 its lifespan based on depreciation. Is that accurate from your studies of?
I would honestly have to look at that. I did not do that calculation. I mean, you guys were, I would assume, based on just the timing of the system of when it was built, that's probably valid. Going a little bit further into that, I was hoping I forgot to talk about a little bit more of the city stuff. I mean, the rate increases that are intended to do this, I will say, like, again, this is to keep the momentum, because a lot of what we've seen from townships is things look too good for too long, that you start to just run on connections for too long. And we have many clients that are in that position that we're trying to wean them off of that, where everything's being normalized through the connection charges they're getting, and they're not seeing the train at the end of the tunnel that's coming at them. This is to try to keep that momentum and to try to make sure that we learn from what's happening from cities and villages in Michigan, and make sure that we don't just like sit on our laurels and see that, yes, the system is depreciating, and we need to start looking at how do we maintain it effectively. It's not just anymore of continuing to grow the system to get more customers. It is starting to get into the phase of where you have to start maintaining it with more staff, better maintenance plans. I'm not saying that you don't do them now. I'm just saying, like, you're going to have to get more in depth on how you're doing maintenance and continuing that momentum to make sure that you run this effective for 50 plus years. So.
Because we really don't make much money off the connection fees. What do we have? 124 new builds a year? It's chump change. We make the money by marking up what we get charged from Granville and Wyoming. In fact, every year it averages between 1.5 million, 2 million, 2.5 million for water and sewer. So what is the average for that?
Though, I do want to point that out. Like, it's not going, that's a key, that it's not going to the general fund or anything. It is staying.
So this is strictly in that water sewer fund. Yep. So we're already making $1.5 million, $2.5 million every year on water and sewer. So this will.
The positive cash flow is about $2 million. Yeah.
So this will be quite a boost.
It's really the capital improvements coming up. And
then you had mentioned 2 additional people because of the aging infrastructure. It's only 1/3 lifespan. What do we know what they're going to be doing? We hire plumbers to tellurize pipe. We hire companies to line pipe. We hire excavating companies to put in pipe. I'm just wondering how that was factored in.
So a lot of that was discussed in the goals for the rate study. I'm going to lean on you if we can go. That was one of the big goals, that we need to have a little bit more staffing.
Yep. Joel's recommendation, Gary's recommendation, our guys are spread too thin to keep up with the work, whether it's the maintenance, whether it's hydrant flushing, all those things are falling behind. So 1 or 2 bodies are absolutely necessary, according to Joel, who is our water sewer expert.
So it's about $150 more next year for the average homeowner, and then about $30 thereafter for the foreseeable future, if we're thinking annually, roughly from your page.
Let me look and make sure. So 38 times, so it'll be, yes,
Okay, all right. So it's a hit next year, but then hopefully it's a very modest incremental approach thereafter, which I guess is meant to match inflation or
into perpetuity.
Inflation and supplier, what the suppliers are putting on you, but yeah, you can see that a lot of this is you're starting to get into the more mature phase of a utility, and you have to make a decision. Obviously, like, decisions can't be made forever, but you start to get in these decisions where hopefully we start doing inflationary rate increases, because eventually it's going to catch up to you one way or another. Either we make a decision to do inflation starting in 2025, or 2030, 2035, you're going to be in the same position where you got to jump rates again. So It's really making a decision as a board of how do you want to operate the funds, knowing that you're now getting into the phase of maintenance and maturity.
So if you look at cities or townships of our size, 54,000, if you look at our reserve, currently have about $16, $17 million, which is basically going to disappear in that new water transmission line. What size reserve does normally a city or a township of our population have? It seems to me $16 million, once that's gone, if we ever need something major to do, we're going to be behind the 8 ball already.
So this is where it gets very difficult for some people to start to separate from personal life versus government life. Because I will say eventually the township is going to get in a position where you're going to have to issue debt for something. There's going to be a massive amount of capital improvements at some point in the future. The hope is that that's 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now. But ultimately, it is not going to be possible to continue to save cash for every single capital improvement for the next 100 years. Because what's going to happen is you're going to start charging the current customers. The one major positive about debt, and again, it depends on, we can debate this a lot, but the one major positive is that the debt payments are paid over the life of the asset. So as people are paying debt, they are currently using that asset. If you save, like what we have to talk about with a lot of communities, especially like really growing townships on Metro Detroit area, for instance, is that it's not necessarily, in my opinion, this is where my opinion comes into play, we had one township say, well, we just built the sewer plant, let's save for the next sewer plant and raise rates to do that, to start stockpiling cash for the next sewer plant upgrade of $30 million. Well, if you do that, you're essentially charging the rates today to maintain the current one, and you're charging the rates to save for the next one on the same ratepayers.
And the next group is using that, then they're not paying.
And then 30 years from now, the people essentially get a brand new sewer plant off the back of the previous generation.
Correct.
That's the one positive, there's other ones, but that's the one main positive about debt. But getting back to your point of, it is an acceptable cash balance. I will say, typically, if you're in a very good position, you're about 12 months compared to operating. Your operating is about $10 million. So if you were to have $10 million in savings, which you can kind of see is like what we're planning to spend down the reserves to in the next couple of years, that is a very healthy cash balance. You see it all over the map, though. We have communities that are operating with 1 or 2 months of reserves because they're just in a position where they're trying to stay, they've run things too bad for too long, and they're trying to make sure that they can't get rate increases through council or something. They're just trying to get by. We have other communities that are 16, 18, 24 months. The main thing to protect yourself is having a logical way of why you're doing rates in what instance. You can never protect yourself fully in the state of Michigan. There's no governmental rules around setting rates and such. There's a lot of case law that you follow what other communities have done in terms of case laws, of them being sued, and make sure you don't do that. But setting a valid cash balance in the range of 12 months over time as you operate things, and making sure that you're saving money for capital improvements and you spend it down, and you save it and you spend it down, and you're hovering around 12 months, which again in your case is around $10 million, is a valid plan.
So I think you had mentioned you would let us know what it would be if we didn't flush over, reallocate money we've already spent or committed to for $1.6 million ARPA How much we talking, how big of a percentage increase?
I can ballpark it.
Double spend that money.
The water analysis here. So one of the things, if you go to page 6, the water analysis. In the green highlights at the bottom, this is why we made the recommendation. So in the next couple years, a lot of the reserves are going to be spent for that transmission main project. You can kind of see that with the capital improvements this year, or excuse me, 24, 25, 26, we're anticipating on current estimates that we will need over $11 million of the reserves to cover these projects. $1.6 million is just a portion of that, so that's why we made the recommendation to try to keep that a little bit more dry in terms of the cash. Trying to think in terms of a ballpark over 3 years, that's 500 and some thousand. I would say probably you're probably looking at another 6 or 7% maybe over 3 years. I would ballpark it at between 10 and 15% more if you do it on a one-time basis. So you're going to need, like the 1.6 million is to fund the projects over the next couple of years. Bringing that in, you're probably going to need it. No, excuse me. Whoops. Back that up. 10%, yeah. 10% is 800,000. 800,000. A little bit less than that, probably around 7% additional, I'm guessing. Other way around. I was going up versus going down. I would say another 7% or so would probably be in the right ballpark if you took out the 1.6 million.
But you'll rerun those numbers for us and share it with our manager so that he can pass it on to us?
Correct.
Awesome,
Yep.
Thank you.
Other comments, questions?
Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Pretty good. Nice job.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, moving on the agenda to item number 11. A proposal to reduce township 2.5 to 2.0. This came out of finance on a split vote here, and is there someone who wants to make a motion to place that before the board?
I would make the motion to approve the reduction of the township millage rate from 2.25 to 2.0 mills for the 2024 tax year, as recommended by the Finance Committee.
Moved by Michael, supported by Ryan. All right, those making the motion wish to advance their case.
I mean, what do you have, Michael, for general fund net position year over year?
I think this year, was it 3 million net position increase? 3 million net position increase?
For what?
From the audit?
I don't know offhand.
All right, I believe it was like 2.93. The year before, 3 million, so we're making, and that's not even including the 1.5 to 2.5 million that water and sewer makes. So I just want to, with inflation and with the proposed increases in water and sewer rates, and this is something the board had talked about. I believe even John Schwam said just a few meetings ago that we could do that, drop it 0.25 mils, and he said, I believe the board's on board with that. So I think it's not a huge amount of savings for our taxpayers, but it's something. And with the ever-increasing cost of everything, something matters.
So taxable home values went up 5% in Michigan, highest increase in 28 years. I think it's perfect timing when we discuss this, that we're looking to potentially increase our rates that would cost the average household about $38.65 just year over year. And we're looking at the average house is $140,000 taxable, which is a $35 cut. That's kind of a wash right there. That helps out our taxpayer right there. That position we continue to gain. I mean, obviously we're looking at a potential DPW building. I think it's a great time to, if we are looking to increase our rates, we can take here but give somewhere else. I think by keeping it where we have a net positive this long, I think we're pretty much telling our constituents that we know how to handle your money better than you do, because we're taking more than we need. And so that's kind of my stance on it.
I'd also point out that we did a constituent survey, 2,700 residents, and the number one consensus was reduce the tax rate, stop spending my money.
I'll remind you, 11,000 people didn't fill out a survey and they were happy where it was.
And it was only 2,060 was the final count.
Disrespectful to people that did take the time to fill it out, to say that their voice doesn't matter.
Here's my thought on that, because I don't think you guys are looking out in the future. So in the past 4 or 5 years, we've seen a huge increase in our revenues because many houses have changed hands. And in the change hands, we've been able to raise their assessments. Currently, interest rates are 7.5%. So you're going to see a lot fewer houses sold because most people are at 2.5%, 3%. They're not selling their homes. But also, 7.5%, we're not getting new homes. Plus, there's no more lots being put into Georgetown Township. I'm on the planning commission. I'm seeing very few developments come along Georgetown right now. So I think the revenues are going to start flatlining or going down. And I also think that sometimes we've made a mistake in telling everybody that we are fiscal conservatives. And that we are, but if we've done a bad job of spending the money properly and doing a bad job of services, I'll give you an example. We have a lot of complaints this year about the cemetery. Part of the reason was because we took the lowest bids for the last 3 years. They did a crappy job. Now we got to hire another guy and try to get it fixed. Hey, we got a great price from some guy out of Greenville who didn't do a very good job. We looked out to be, we're totally concerned we did a poor job for our township constituents because we didn't hire the proper people. We tried to be the lowest guy. That's not always the best guy. So now we did hire some, getting it straightened out, and that's good. It's a local guy. I think he's doing a great job. My point is, if we have extra money, is it because we didn't take that money and properly do a better job with the money that we were given? Were we good stewards of that money? We are still the lowest tax rate, basically in the state, at 2.25. I also look at the water and sewer bill. This guy did a great job presentation. He pretty much affirmed everything I've been saying for the last 2 years I've been on the board, is that we've got a lot of things that need to be fixed, and just doing general maintenance because of the age of our infrastructure. We've done a good job taking care of roads the last 2 years. We've done almost 30 miles, which is great. But I also think if we have extra money, maybe we should be looking at taking some of that excess and putting it in water sewer so that we have more of a reserve. Because I believe that 16 to 17 million we have in a reserve is not going to be enough to cover that water line on 48th Avenue. I'm in the construction industry and I'm watching bids. If you don't believe me, look at the estimate we got on putting in upgrading some of our lift pumps. The estimate came in from Pioneer Newhoff for $400 and some thousand. We only got one bid, and it was $700 and some thousand. That's $300 grand more than what we were estimated at. But we only got one bid because nobody wanted to even bid it. Nobody wanted to give us a number because they were too busy, and that's what we paid. And my fear is we get this water line at 48th Avenue, and we suck up all our reserves, and we don't have anything for reserve for something that we could transfer money from our general fund into the water sewer fund, and we could correct that.
I guess I'm confused because one minute you're saying we can't build anymore, so we can't depend on that tax revenue, but now on the other hand, then you're saying we need to expand our water system.
We need to expand the water system. We need to expand the water. No, we're expanding. We are increasing our water system on 48th Avenue because Wyoming is putting in a larger transmission line down M45. And because of the larger volume of water that they're shipping in, it's going to decrease our pressure in our own water system on the north and northwest quadrant of property. So what we need to do is we need to put in a larger water line in order to boost our pressure in our water towers on 48th Avenue. It's not so much for growth, it's because Wyoming is changing how we're going to get water. Currently, the water station at New Holland is able to have increased pressure because the water line coming from Wyoming is smaller. So you don't get the volume, you get the pressure. When they increase the volume, the pressure is going to go down. It's going to decrease our pressure in the water line in the township.
I talked to the main head guy at the Wyoming water treatment plant and asked him about that, and he said that had no effect on it. This was a while ago. I'll get the numbers again and reconnect with him, but I'm confused on that too, I guess.
And Rob, do we have other costs that are going up in the next year?
Yes.
Like police and fire and...
Fire, elections, the budget, yes.
So the elections, because we've got that early voting.
Well, we have 4 elections next year.
4 elections, okay.
Mandates early voting, inflation, all the above.
Yep. Everything costs more nowadays.
Amber, I sent you a PDF. Can you pull it up? Because I feel like we keep talking about the survey that we did of our residents, and so I just did some data disaggregation. So forgive me for putting on my 7th grade math teacher hat for a second, but there was a question: if the township were to achieve a budget surplus, what would be your preference? And the results came in 2 batches. The results that we had gotten as paper ones turned in, and the results that were ones that were done online. And so we had gotten an email from Rob Yersing that was this whole packet, and I looked at both the paper ones and the online ones and added them together. So if we look at percent of responses, I'm in the second percent down that first column. I should just walk over there and be a math teacher. But it is true that 47% of the people who responded said that they would like us to reduce the rates that residents pay. But the other 2 options together add up to 51% of all respondents, and that is kind of the same idea. 39% want us to invest the surplus in community improvements, and the other 12 want us to maintain the board's current direction. So those 2 together, what I actually did was added up the votes and then took it out of the total responses turned in, which was 2,060. But those are 51%, and this is only 47. So for us to say that the majority of our survey responses said that they wanted it reduced is not really accurate. I also took these total results and split it up. We mailed 18,000 surveys. We got 2,000 back. And so to me, that says that there's 16,000 people that are pretty happy. I took the census population of people over 18 because we were happy to have any of them contribute, and our number of registered voters, and broke it down even more. I think that when we have only 11% of the ones that we mailed were returned, and only 5% of our registered voters are turning in survey results, I just don't want us to be handcuffed by the fact that 47% is higher than 39 or 12, because the 39 or 12, if you put those together, was actually 51% of the responses. Either wanted us to continue to invest our surplus or to maintain our current direction. I also looked at what they said about roads, sidewalks, parks, library, and in all of those, the overwhelming majority of responses are saying maintain your current direction, maintain your current direction, maintain your current direction. 71, 58, 70, 69% are all saying maintain your current direction, which tells me that we need to maintain our current income so that we can maintain our current direction on roads, sidewalks, parks, library. So thanks, Amber, for being so quick with that. You read my mind. But
teacher.
No problem.
I love Common Core math.
I think that we need to not be taking results out of context.
I was concerned when we took that survey. I stated as much when we sat here, and Gary, I think you said the same, which is, I think if you'll advise, go ahead and do it, but understand I'm not going to be beaten over the head with that unscientific survey later. You've actually used that unscientific survey to only show that it really didn't beat us over the head on this issue. And I would say anecdotally, it's more than anecdotal because I'm around the community and have been for many years and have been in a position of leadership for many years. I honestly don't recall, and this is the truth, I do not remember a constituent, I'm sure it happened, and if so, it's probably less than 5 fingers on one hand, in all the years I've served, asking for a tax cut, which is weird because most people do, right? And especially most of our residents are still confused that the summer tax bill does not go to the township. And it's the only one that really feels like it hammers them, right? So I think we would be irresponsible to cut the taxes. We did cut taxes with the last board about 2.5, 3 years ago because there had been a short-term bump that had been done related to some projects and then it was returned. When I see that we're less than Crockery Township, Colton Township, Chester Township, I realize there are economies of scale and we've got more residents, et cetera.
Apples and oranges.
But still, it's still indicative of the fact that we are operating. This is why I don't hear from residents right here about taxes. In fact, I hear the opposite. I love my taxes. I moved into, Georgetown from such and such. I can't believe the difference. It's wonderful. I have heard that numerous times. And I think it'd be irresponsible because I think at this point, we don't know what the future holds. We don't know what inflation might do. We don't know what could come down the pike in terms of national issues that can affect us locally. I don't know if, we could have a hot war. We could have any number of things where we're saying, you know what, we didn't see that coming. And it's always, I think, in the best term interest of the residents to have, especially when you're at an already modest rate, which, by the way, I'd remind this board, the voters, not the board, the voters approved 4.0 mills years ago. We are already 1 3/4 mills below what the voters themselves voted for. We have been very, very responsible with that. Allow me to finish my point. Very responsible with that. I think we'd be irresponsible to look and say, hey, we've got a surplus. Why don't we give that back to the tune of, $35 per household? They're not going to feel it, number one. Number two, they're going to feel it if we suddenly need to, much like the rate study here, if we suddenly need to increase. And there won't be the political will, quite honestly. You won't have the political will to raise taxes if you should lower them now when you shouldn't, at a point when you shouldn't. And I think, and Gary, kind of to your point, although not focused on water sewer, if we've got more money somehow in reserves than some feel we ought to, then to me that's indicative of a failure to reinvest in your township. And by that I mean specifically the personnel and the people. I had to work 8 months last year to try to get inflationary increases for our employees. It took me 3 or 4 months, never got it out of committee. I think there's a reluctance to invest in the important assets of this township, which begin with the people that serve our township and work for us. And if we've got a lot of extra money, you know what? Maybe we should be paying them better and more fairly. And I think also, as we saw with our parks review this past meeting, you've got some deterioration here and there. Fix it. We've got the money. Fix it. When there's a road that needs a path because, you know what, so-and-so's been hit there and we've lost another resident to a car accident, why don't we have a path? We've got the money on some of our primary roads to put a path. We have the ability to do some things that would make people's lives better, that would improve the community, that would improve, frankly, the value of their homes much more than the $35 that would be returned to them. And I think at the same time would also make their children want to remain residents and want to live here and come back here because we're doing the things that make it for the long-term betterment of all of them and of the community as a whole. So I just don't think it's not something people are clamoring for, and I think it'd be unwise. I'm not sure truly if the motive behind it here is political and an next election. I don't know. You guys can explain yourselves, but regardless of whether it is or not, I think as a board member, as a voting member, as someone who's the steward of the finances for the township, I think it would be a poor idea and one that would ultimately, I think, come back to hurt the township. So,
I call the question.
Okay.
Well, I'd like
Anyone else before we call the question? Some haven't had a chance to speak.
On my personal goals for our goals we submitted that we'd like to see the direction of our township, mine was to reduce it by a quarter. We received about $5 million in COVID money. We're not able to give that directly back to the people, but we could cut their taxes. Gentlemen, how much will this cost us?
What's that?
How much will it cost us if we reduce it about $35 a homeowner?
It's $584,000.
So we're looking at a little over $500,000. We received about $5 million. And that's one of the reasons I made it my goal. I thought we've got this money coming in. We're in very solid financial shape. We took those funds and we were able to take care of many of our other expenses at that time. We normally run a few $1 million, as much as $3 million, as Mike had said, per year in surplus. But can we make it permanent? I don't know. I am willing to vote for it. I proposed it. I don't think you're going to get enough votes. If we were to take and have a sunset clause on it for 2 years, we might be able to pick up a fourth vote. Then another board would decide whether to continue it or not. I agree with many of Jim's concerns and Gary and everyone else. I know this is really tough, but we just had a 5% increase in taxes. We're continuing to grow. We have cash reserves. We're talking about $500,000. I also believe we can build the pickleball courts. I believe we can hire more people. We've got the cash to do that, and we should. And we should also take with our DPW, but we have the cash there. Maybe some funds will come out of our general fund. We'll vote on that, try to make a decision. But we're in an excellent shape. And we've had new library, new senior center. Incredible things have been, I think, built to improve the quality of lives of our people. I'd like to see us cut it 0.25%. But is there support from the two of you to put a sunset clause on it for 2 years and see if we can get a fourth person to vote for it?
You just made it political, John. You said, let's drop it till after the election and then we'll go back up. That's just what you just said.
We have the COVID funds that are coming that we've received.
That's a one-shot deal, though. That's not every year. That's just one shot.
We're talking about $500,000. So you could say it would be 10 years. But I think there's a possibility one of you might. Otherwise, it's going down.
So we only overtax our residents $2.5 million instead of $3 million. That's not bad. I'd go even lower if I thought I had the support.
Well, I think Michael called the question, so.
Well, I think you a chance. You don't have to. I just want to make sure everyone's had a chance to speak before we call the question.
Well, yes, I did speak, so.
Okay.
We're good.
All right, does anyone then, the question's been called, any reason not then to vote? It's a resolution, so we've got to have a voice vote. I'll just say it's worthy of the discussion. I appreciate it, and I don't mean in any way by my comments I shouldn't have in any way tried to come across this question. I think it's a reasonable discussion. It's a reasonable debate, and people can differ, you know? So, all right. So, clerk, would you call the roll?
Mrs. Grassman?
No.
Mr. Velding?
No.
Treasurer?
Yes.
Supervisor?
No.
Clerk is yes. Ms. Steele?
No.
Ms. Schwam?
Yes.
4-3 now.
Okay, measure fails, 4-3. Item number 12, second public comment period. At this time, as I said before, you've got a chance to come forward and address the board on any topic you like, whether it's something we covered this evening or whether something else that might be on your mind. So, yes, sir. Just ask you to identify your name and your street.
28th Avenue, Jenison, Michigan. I'm kind of disappointed. You guys have allowed that clock to go up. It's a waste of money. Nobody really actually, it's not beautification. It was broke for half the time until Mike told me that he had to put Swiss batteries in the thing. That's a big joke. Kmart, you bought that. For what? It's still vacant. It's an ugly mess. You've done lousy jobs. Also, I go back, way back, 20 years ago, when Family Fair wanted to buy that corner, 28th and Baldwin, and you two were all for it. You could care less about people across the street or in that neighborhood. This is what it's been. Now when it comes, I'm going to tell you what I got. In my life, I got an increase of meds over 150% that I got worried about coming up next year. And you guys want to keep adding more burden. Let's get this straight. You all bowed your head. You prayed to a God. I don't know what God it was. But the God in the Bible says you're not to put burden on people. That was a complaint that he had with the children of Israel. Where are they today? Solomon screwed people by laying taxes heavily on them, and they split from them. That's in history. Something you need to study.
All right, anyone else? I'll pause a moment in case. All right, seeing none, we'll close the second public comment period. Discussion and general information. I know, Jerry, you brought up something earlier, and I'm trying to recall what that was.
I was talking about the money market that we have and the interest rates and what we're doing with those investments.
Sure. I don't know that we'll try to review our whole financial, committee meeting, but I think I'd look to Justin just to summarize thoughts about the money market and the fact that the rates are moving, and we're trying to get the best rates we can,
Okay.
We made that change, moving forward, we're capturing that. But with the yield curve and where CDs are fluctuating, the difference between Grand River Bank and our money market at Mercantile, 1/10 of 1%.
Oh.
So we're monitoring that. I think it's a board decision that was in September. We're going to reevaluate see if there's an early penalty for your had to pull out for some reason.
CDs that are maturing, one in October, one in November, or one in September, one in October.
September and October.
September and October. So those are going to roll back into CDs. But luckily Max Powell called us and offered percentage on money market.
Okay.
So we're making money on that. So
Good.
It's fantastic.
No, just want to make sure we're being good stewards of what we have.
Yeah.
That's what we do too. So.
Other discussion, general information among the board.
I was going to comment about, I'm glad that bi-monthly communiques are back. That's fantastic. I was surprised when I saw that it actually had, normally it'll say, service committee recommended this to the board, and that's it. But this time we actually had some detail on it that finance committee recommended reducing the tax rate by 0.25 mils. Ryan and Michael were a yes, and Jim was a no, and then a little detail, just kind of like do a little influence on everybody. Just so in case you don't read the minutes, I'm going to give you a little breakdown here, and then if that wasn't enough, then a memo came on Friday. So just in case that wasn't enough, I want to get you all on board with this right ahead of time. So that's good. I like communication and transparency.
You don't want it.
No, I love it. Transparency is great. In fact, I've got it right here. I've got a copy.
Well,
so
thank you, Mike.
That's fantastic. So it'll come in handy in a couple of years.
Is this gripe time or is this discussion time?
This is both.
Okay.
But like Dare would say, is the second time you can talk about how your grandma makes the best apple pie or whatever you want. So.
Okay. All right. Anyone else? And hearing none, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Support. And all in favor say aye.
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 Closed, meeting is adjourned. Thank you.